Welcome back. I like to, as you know, bring out the truth. And there's some fiction going around that has to do with some of the products that are being sold on TV, on the internet, and most especially in this situation here to people who own bolt-action rifles. It's a premise that if you attach a bolt extension to a bolt-action rifle, that you will improve its handling and you will improve the grasp, especially with gloved hands. Now, the problem with that particular premise is that it presumes a falsehood. That is, that one grasps a bolt. A rank amateur would grasp a bolt. You saw me just a moment ago operating this rifle with a standard bolt, unmodified, and I was using these are the heaviest gloves that I can possibly find. These are heavy leather, and there's no special fingers here, modifications of any kind. Heavy leather gloves that are thin slate lined, and I use these in the dreaded cold winters that we have here in central New Hampshire, when it's down well below zero, 15, 20 below zero, and I'm outside blowing snow with my Kubota tractor, and snow is flying all around, and those keep my hands toasty warm. And I think that if you look back historically, that around the world, in some of the greatest wars that have ever, and some of the greatest battles that have ever occurred where bolt-action rifles have been used, the soldiers actually wore gloves. Now, how is it that they were able to get away with wearing gloves while operating a bolt which they had no grasp of? Again, it presumes a premise that one grasps a bolt, which is a false premise. When I was, back in the day, and that's way back, when I was learning how to drive, my dad took me out with a column-mounted stick shift. That's the kind of car that you had in those days. Back then, a lot of cars didn't have the features that they have now. Cars weren't actually easy to drive. In some cases, they weren't even fun to drive, except for when you were brand new driving. Everything was fun then. But you didn't have power brakes. You didn't have automatic transmissions, and you didn't necessarily have power steering. So for instance, if you bought yourself a Chevy Bel Air or something, you basically had little or nothing. In fact, if you weren't careful, you could buy a used car, and if you didn't look in the ad, if it didn't say R and H, R/H, that meant that it didn't even have a radio and heater, believe it or not. Heaters weren't even required in those days. They were pretty crude. But a column-mounted stick shift was quite common, and it protruded about 4 or 5 inches beyond the steering wheel itself. And when it came down to getting your driver's license, your license examiner was watching for certain things that you did. You had to still stick your hand out the window and give hand signals. And one other thing that he always watched for is if you were getting a standard license. I wanted to be able to drive a standard car, so I wanted to get a standard license. There were 2 different kinds of licenses in those days where I grew up. And that being the case, if you had a standard license, you had to be qualified on a standard transmission. And that standard transmission was typically a column-mounted standard. It was before they had them, on the floor in most cases. So what you had to do, and this was the way the examiner required it, and this is what my dad taught me right off the bat, was you never grabbed it here. If you grabbed the stick there, if you grabbed the shift lever there, they just simply tell you to pull over the side of the road and the test was done for the day and you didn't get your license. No, what you had to do was, it was what's called a palm up, palm down maneuver. You grasped the lever like this and you threw it up through the neutral gate and straight up to second. That's palm up. and then palm down. That's the only thing that you could do. Palm up and palm down. And then to pull it back into first gear, over the hump and back to you. You pulled it around. Notice that I never once grabbed it here. It's the same thing with a bolt action rifle. Only a rank amateur would ever grab a bolt like this. I might do it if I'm at a bench and I'm just flipping the bolt up to peel the cartridge out so I can put it back in the box, you know, and empty. But when you're in the field, it's up, back, palm down, forward. 2 motions. It's not 4 motions. It's not up, back, forward, and down. Because doing that, eventually you're going to lose your grasp of the bolt, because you basically got a loose ball and socket here, which is going to depart from the hand. And this is the sort of thing that you're going to do, and especially if you've got gloves on. So anybody who was ever taught to operate a bolt-action rifle back when bolt-action rifles were commonplace, and believe me, they're far more common back, 40 years ago than they are now. Everybody's buying ARs. Again, up, down. 2 motions. Up, down. Up, down. That's all there was to it. And that motion can be done just as easily from mounted on the shoulder. It's just a matter of up, down. Palm up, palm down. Now, there's also, aside from the fact that when you have that modification done to a rifle, now there's different ways to go about it. You can simply spend silly money and order one that somehow sticks onto the existing bolt, or you can do what a lot of people are doing, which they think is far more aesthetically pleasing, is to have a gunsmith chop this bolt off, grind it off, and weld on a new one, regrind it, polish it, blue it, and charge you his hourly rate to have a modified gun that doesn't have any resale value. If that's what your piece of cake is, you go right ahead. I have no objection to anybody doing what they want to do. Please don't bother to write me and tell me what you prefer to do, because I couldn't care less. I'm telling the person who is being buffaloed that that's not what you have to do. I'm talking to the reasonable person that doesn't want to change his rifle, doesn't want to spend extra money, and wants to have the same gun when he passes it on down through the family or sells it as the day he bought it without changing it. Now there's another problem when you have a modified bolt, an extended bolt. These bolts were not, these were not engineered by dummies. This is a very well thought out, very well engineered bolt. It's compact. It sits, if you're going horseback hunting in the Rockies, this sits compact in a scabbard that's properly made for it. It also, when I carry it, it doesn't hinder my carrying. That bolt sits nice and really right against my hip or my belt, and there's no problem at all. It's very comfortable. If that's an extended bolt handle, it's going to be jabbing me all day long, especially if it's stuck way out there. And if it's one of those big hellacious balls, you're going to have a bruise there. Not only that, but you're not going to get that into a scabbard, and it's going to actually complicate operations, because now you've got a bolt that's always in the way. It's just out there. So again, it's back and forward. That's all there is to it. I appreciate you watching, and thank you for subscribing. Tell all your friends about us, and God bless.